this evening. My name is Rebecca and I am assistant editor at Ghouls Magazine, and I'm also a writer of horror think pieces, editorials and essays on the genre. So, waiting in the wings as I speak are 5 incredible guests who are much smarter than me and are going to be joining me to give their take and insights on the subject. But first, I just wanted to share a few words about my latest project, which has really been the inspiration for me putting this panel together, because I wanted to dig a little bit deeper and have a wider discussion with people in the community about this topic. So last month, I released my first feature-length publication, Mums and Sons, which, oh look, I happen to have a copy of just here. Fancy that. So Mums and Sons then is an exploration of familial relationships in Psycho, the Babadook and Hereditary. It explores those familial relationships through 3 stages of life: boyhood, teenagers, and adulthood. And within the analysis, it uses 7 key focus points as its framework, and they are relationships and distance, family secrets, the outsider status, notions of doubling and duality, acts of repression, and of course, motherhood. So, this has been a labour of love, truly, deeply, and I'm just incredibly excited to share it with you all. I would just like to say that this is a culmination of 3 independent collaborators working together creatively. So firstly, there's myself, I'm an independent writer, but then there is Ken Wynn, who has created this amazing cover and lots more artwork inside. He is an independent artist. And then finally, Plastic Brain Press, who have put this all together. They are an independent publisher. So if you are interested in any of the themes that I've mentioned, in any or all of the films that I've mentioned as well, in representations of motherhood in horror, or in film analysis in general, then you can pick up a copy by visiting Plastic Brain Press, and they are at plastic-brain-press.com, or you can also find them on Twitter and they're at Brain Plastic. Alternatively, if you like, you can find me on socials and click on the link trees in my bios, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Pendle Pumpkin. Details of how to get a copy will also be shared after this panel, and I believe running across the bottom of the screen on a banner at some point in this discussion. So please keep a lookout for that if you're interested. And finally, I just wanted to say a huge heartfelt thank you to everyone who has already supported Mums and Sons. It's been just fantastic for me to see photographs of you all holding your copies and to hear from everyone who has enjoyed it. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy my work. So that being said, it's now on to tonight's discussion. So, possessed, monstrous and vengeful, anxious, othered and bloody, comforter, defender and protector. The mother figure in horror is nothing if not indefinable. And tonight we are going to have our own discussion here at Ghouls Magazine, as I would now like to welcome my 5 guests who are going to provide their insights on motherhood in horror. Welcome, everybody. It's like University Challenge, all the windows. Thank you so much to everyone for being here. It's so lovely to see you all. Before we kick off, I would just like to give everyone the opportunity to introduce themselves. So if you can all just briefly say who you are and what you do. And then later there'll be a chance to share social links and also plug any up and coming projects. So if Kat, we can start with you.
Yeah, so my name's Kat Hughes. I'm a film journalist who primarily writes for thehollywoodnews.com, and I also am a mother of a very independent 3-year-old.
I love the independent bit. That's good. It's a good sign for the future. And Alex with an E, Alex Cronenberg. How about you?
Hi, Rebecca. My name's Alex Cronenberg. I'm a regular contributor to Moving Pictures Film Club, horrified and love horror. And I'm a father to a 2-year-old who is currently causing hell downstairs. I'm fairly certain.
Thank you. And Alex Turner?
Hello, I'm Alex. I contribute now and then to Ghouls Magazine and Horror Obsessive, another couple of outlets previously, but those are it at present. Day job, I work for nothing like those, but a large university, and I am a parent. I'm inclined to say that rather than a mother because I'm an agender person, and my kid may well interrupt at some point. He's just down the hall.
And Igraine, how about you?
Hi, I'm Igraine. I'm the host of the horror movie podcast, What a Scream. I am also a writer for Ghouls Magazine, for Moving Pictures Film Club, and occasionally Fangoria. And I'm the mother to the wildest 4-year-old you will ever meet.
If they're wild at 4, I mean, I hate to think what 13 is going to look like.
I'm hoping it's just going to level out. It'll become really boring at 13. It'll be great.
Show him lots of horror films. That should do the trick. And then finally, Megan, hello.
Hello. I'm Megan Kenny. I'm a contributor for Ghouls Mag and Hero Scream and hoping to do more horror writing. And I'm a forensic psychologist and parapsychologist as my day job. So spooky ghosts all around.
Great. Okay. So my first question then to kick things off is, what are your thoughts about how horror tackles and presents the experience of motherhood? And why do you think that horror in particular is a good vehicle for exploring this? And let's start with Igraine.
I think the way horror has explored motherhood in particular is so interesting because originally we get a lot of horrific mothers, like the worst of the worst. That seems to be a really like historical thing. But it seems in later years, especially modern horror, are exploring the mothers from their own perspectives rather than, the Mrs. Bates character. We're exploring, like in Jennifer Kent's The Babadook, what it is to be a mother. And I think the reason that motherhood and parenthood is fodder for horror is because it's so fucking horrific. Like, I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it and be like, oh, it's fairy farts and unicorn dust, because pregnancy, having a baby, birth, and then having to be responsible for this little life who is basically predisposed to kill itself all the time. You're like, don't fall down the stairs, oh God. It's horrible, and it's such an emotional and physically life-changing thing that, of course, it lends itself to horror. It's perfect for horror.
Yeah, that's it. When you're talking, I'm thinking we've got like body horror, psychological horror, all within just like the pregnancy and the motherhood. And, it's not just representing mothers once they become mothers, but, through the pregnancy as well. Like Alice Lowe did such a great job with Prevenge. So I like that comment about mothers telling their own stories. And so, Megan, how about you? What do you think about this question?
I think I agree. I mean, I totally agree. I think it's there's sort of different phases of it, isn't there? So pregnancy, you can look at that body horror element, this idea of something in, that's internal, that's sort of part of you, but also alien. And I think also with recent events, you see that there's a big thing about autonomy, about how your body's no longer your own. And with current things that are going on in society. We see that, I think that's a fear that is readily explored by horror, this idea that then you're somehow just like a vehicle for someone else and you lose your personhood. And I think that's being explored really interestingly in a lot of films, that idea of losing yourself to give life to someone else, which in itself is quite a horrifying concept in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, where does your identity go? And you know, in becoming a mother, that's almost like the title of you now, like your mother. So yeah, I totally agree with you on like terms of identity, and then of course autonomy. So how about you, Kat?
Well, sort of continuing on from what Megan was saying, you know, for me, since I've become a mother, I think one of the films that's really resonated with me is Hellbender. It's the new one by the Addams family, and it's about a mother and a teenage daughter. But mother, as so often in horror films especially, mother isn't given any other name other than mother. That's literally all she is. And that kind of feels at times all I am. Like when I take my daughter to toddler group or to preschool, I am always referred to as her mother. Like, oh look, it's Aurora's mum. Like when they phone up to tell me, you know, she's had an accident or something, is that Aurora's mum, not is that Kat. And it really resonated with the film and the respect that is just, she is just mother. And the film deals with all these issues of the daughter coming to take over her identity. Sort of, she's being replaced and she's being absorbed by her daughter, which I think is like a really interesting facet of the motherhood thing, because it's something that you don't see. Because I think horror, more than any other genre, is honest. You know, even films like What to Expect When You're Expecting doesn't tell you what to expect when you're expecting. It does sugarcoat it and gloss over a lot of stuff, whereas horror will happily hold the mirror up and go, no, this is what it's like. And, you know, people need to know this stuff before it's too late.
Yeah, and sort of as a mother, do you find delving into films like Hellbender, do you find that like a comfort, a reassurance?
Yeah, I mean, so she was one just before the pandemic hit, so she was just old enough to start going to like toddler groups and things, but then there weren't any. So in a strange way, I think I sort of found my mothers to talk to through films like Hellbender, and, you know, more recently like the Babadook and stuff. Is that there wasn't the, you know, go and sit and have a coffee while the kids play and get to chat. So I kind of had to do it through films and TV. And I definitely found that what was being presented in some horror films definitely felt, I mean, she's lovely and I love her to bits, but it definitely felt a bit more like my own experience than some of the other stuff that was out there.
Wow, I just love that you used film to sort of feel out, you know, what was going on. It's like it just speaks to the healing power of horror, I think.
Exactly.
And Alex Turner, what about you?
About how horror presents the experience of motherhood. Well,
yeah,
you mentioned at the start lots of descriptive words about mothers in film, and they can also apply to mothers in real life. Motherhood in general is such a rich subject that I would say it's a shame that the presentation of mothers in film, in horror films, hasn't been broader.
Yeah.
Like somebody said earlier, there have been too many horror films, I think, showing mothers as either unhinged, bad influence, horrible. But more recently, different angles. I think horror is a perfect genre for taking an unusual slant on the experience to make an audience think, simply because there's so much scope for creativity. We got loss of identity in Possessor. We have fantasy in Evolution, a bit of a what-if story. Relic, full of metaphor. Way back then, we had satire in the Midwich Cuckoos. There's so many different aspects of motherhood. They don't have to be all bad influences at all, do they? So much scope.
No, it's exactly. It's almost it's impossible even to cover it all in a discussion like this, because it is, as you say, it's so rich. And you and I were messaging before this panel about the lack of representation in certain areas as well. So, and I do think horror is often like a forerunner in stepping out and you know, presenting things in different ways, like you say, because the genre has so much more in terms of creativity and imagination and what it can do. It has so many more tools at its disposal.
Certainly.
So I would hope that we begin to see more of that. So Alex, have we come to you yet? Alex Cronenberg?
No. Obviously, I am not a mother, but I think the genre has always offered like a safe space from judgment, at least to its fans. And I think that there's lots of aspects of being a parent which can be controversial about your own internal thoughts and fears. And I think that horror does a really good job of presenting these and making you feel like you're not alone in feeling the way that you do, even if sometimes you're afraid to admit to those emotions yourself. And so it's nice to have that kind of like camaraderie, that almost like silent camaraderie with the screen, where you know that other people feel the same way you do, even though you may not ever admit to your child that sometimes you resent them, sometimes you're afraid of them, all these kind of negative emotions that can come with your bond with your child. I love the fact that horror offers you that. And just through watching like Hereditary, it opens up conversations maybe with partners about, you know, sometimes he does my head in. Sometimes I really wish that I was not a parent anymore for a certain amount of time. And it's okay to admit those things, because we all know that we kind of like adore our children, but they can really, really upset us, and they can really trigger every negative fear that we have. And I feel like it's so good that horror offers that opportunity to feel like we're not alone in that. And maybe that's because perhaps there's lots of other kind of like visceral, confrontational things that are happening on screen, and so all those conversations that are happening in the quiet times, they're accepted. I'm not sure, but I've always loved that about horror, and I think even more recently, certainly into the 2000s, we've become a lot more open and honest about how hard it is to be a parent.
Yeah, but it's glorious as well, though, isn't it?
Just a counterbalance, yeah. I think you're totally right. I love how horror actually opens up conversation about a lot of taboos, and I think, you know, feelings around parenthood, shall we call it, even not just motherhood, can, you know, negative feelings around parenthood can be really off limits, you know, because as a society we are taught that it should be joyous, and, you know, I think it's great to hear you talk about it being almost like and Alex Turner, you said as well, almost like a silent friend. It's like, and I think even in the moments where it's not explicitly said, you know, it's sort of more implicit and it's under the surface, that can help us to sort of, as you say, feel less alone. So on to my next question then. So thinking about the representation of motherhood in horror and how it can be both monsterizing, but it can also give power to mother figures. How do you feel about those two things? And do you think they go hand in hand? And what do they potentially tell us? And this time I'll start with Megan.
I think it's really that motherhood can be monstrous is a truth that's worth exploring, and I think it's a fascinating aspect. And, you know, part of it I do think comes from this idea that, you know, we in patriarchal societies, that motherhood is frightening to the patriarchy, because it's the one thing that you know they can't do. You know, Dr. Frankenstein tried it; it didn't go very well, that sort of thing. So it's because it's seen as this power, like a powerful thing to be able to create something, then it's denigrated instead to, you know, in society as though it's. So I think there's this social and cultural duality, and motherhood as powerful and powerless as well. And again, it comes back to that deferring needs, all your needs to keep someone else alive. That there's a real duality to it that I think is really interesting, and that's where things like, I think the Babadook shows that in a really good way. And I love the Babadook, Rebecca. So, but she's in society, in her interactions with people, she's seen as this sort of like meek, very, sort of blends into wallpaper a little bit. But then when she's confronted by this threat to her life and a child's life, then she becomes this powerful person who can overcome it, and there's much more complexity to Babadook than that, but just as one aspect of it, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I was thinking as well about, in terms of, I think someone else has already touched on it, but like the historical villainization of mothers. So I'm thinking maybe like Margaret White, monsterized but powerful at the same time.
But it's demonized as well. So it's like, if you have power as a mother, then there's like a demonization of that, or that rage that you would feel if someone threatened your child, for instance. I think we're seeing a shift towards it being presented in a much more, I suppose, positive way, moving away from that idea of the, crazy mother with an axe coming in. But that sort of desire to protect has been demonized, and I think it's interesting to see how we're shifting away from that towards a more sympathetic perspective about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, Alex Turner, have you got any thoughts on this one?
Just a little bit, because something related cropped up in real life recently, and that I've talked to my kid about. Their teacher wearing two hats, authority, teaching on one hand, but pastoral and caring on the other. Parents do the same. But when you look at films, you only ever see, or usually see, just one of those. And that's the problem, I think, with the image of mothers in horror films that I'm familiar with anyway. They tend to have one type. That there is some breadth, but there tends not to be variation within that film. So it's interesting, and I've seen a lot more variation in non-horror films, to be honest. So let's look out for it, please.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's often just broad strokes, or it's just like characterized with one type. Whereas I think, we are talking a lot about the Babadook, but I feel it's like there's a lot more complexity there that is really nice to see. And so, Agrain, what about you? What are your thoughts on this one?
I did an article, I think it was for Mother's Day for Moving Pictures Film Club, and I was chatting about the theory of the final mother. And something I've noticed a lot in horror films is we have, what if the final girl grew up and decided to have kids? And, it's almost as if there's this duality in single horror films where we've got a mother figure that has to come up against her monstrous counterpart. And it's like, who's going to win? Who's going to be the final mother? And I think it's really interesting how horror is exploring the monstrous mother versus the final mother. In this, rather than just having this patriarchal view of motherhood, which has been the Bates, the Norma Bates, what she was monstrous, how did her son turn out? Same with like Friday the 13th. She was monstrous, she bore a monster. So it's really interesting in modern horror that we've got this final girl. We see it in Mama, where we've got the monstrous mama coming up against the adoptive mother, Annabelle. We see it in the Babadook with this kind of counterpart within herself. She's got to fight against her monstrous side to be a good mother, because no one's perfect good mother. So I've really enjoyed seeing this final mother theory in response to this spectrum of motherhood in horror.
Yeah, and I must say, I've read Agrain's article and it is fantastic. I was like, damn, why didn't I think of that? Because I love my final girls and I love mothers in horror. So I was like, this is she needs to write a book or something, definitely. So I'm campaigning for a book now. So, Kat, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's sort of echoing what other people have said. You know, like historically, Mother has been seen as this, you know, monstrous figure. If she, because I think, you know, Carrie's mum is a single mother. I think this is especially true within the single parent families. The woman, the mother, has been deemed to be all powerful and therefore monstrous, because heaven forbid a woman should have any power or autonomy. But I think the one that sort of sticks out to me, and it's sort of sci-fi horror. I was brought up on James Cameron, so Aliens. You know, you've got this juxtaposition of Ellen Ripley and the Alien Queen. And, you know, a lot of people deem, you know, the Xenomorph Queen to be a monster, but at the end of the day, she is just another parent looking after her children. I think there's an equally, if not more interesting film told from her perspective about these foreigners coming into her world and just killing off all of her children. You know, it's a really sort of, I don't know if many people sort of look at it in that way, but it's, you know, there's lots of facets of motherhood that, you know, are there to delve and dissect, and that's always one that, you know, sometimes I feel a little bit sorry for the Alien Queen when, you know, all of her eggs get like flamethrowed by Ripley.
Yeah, I'm working my way through the Alien films at the moment, so Aliens is like really fresh in my head, and yeah, I couldn't agree more. She's just protecting her children at the end of the day.
Yeah, does that really interest? Oh.
That's because she's essentially like an animal. She doesn't know any different. She's just, you know, instinct.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's that really interesting, like, sort of sub-theme to it as well, about how the crew then become mothers by force, you know, that they experience this birth process. Aliens, I love Aliens. I could talk about it all day, so I'll stop.
We'll have another panel just on Aliens. And Alex Cronenberg, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think it's about evolution. I think sometimes with this, I feel like in the past you would see taking power back through a male counterpart. So it might be through like Norman Bates, or in like Scream, it would be the mother wreaking revenge for her husband's affair. And it's nice to see that actually now mothers and doing that without the need for males. So they're doing it themselves. They're taking it into their own hands, and they don't need that like substitute male protector or avenger or whatever it might be, because the mother can do all that work and more herself. So we are seeing that more and more with films like Son, and other ones which look at like protecting the offspring, and we're not seeing any more of the desire to place a male substitute in the place of the mother, which is quite refreshing. And I love Alien, the whole Alien franchise myself, and I was just thinking as you were speaking then about Alien Resurrection and how Ripley was kind of like monsterized. I know it's going to cause some controversy.
I love that
how
film.
Alien was monsterized in order. Oh, great. Okay, me too. Yeah, how Ripley was monsterized in order to show like physical affection to what would be her biological child or biological offspring in the child alien, and she needed to be like a genetic kind of like freak or however you want to describe it, in order for her to show emotion and to show love for a biological child. I thought that was it must have been a purposeful choice. But I thought it was quite interesting.
Yeah, it's really quite subversive, that. I haven't quite got to Alien Resurrection yet. It's next on my list, and I hear very divisive things, so I'm excited. So thinking about then the threat of, or the potential threat of, loss of identity, a takeover of our bodies and minds, and the weight of being responsible for another life, all which are things that terrify me. But all these fears can, as I say, potentially arrive with motherhood. So what do you think about the way in which these types of anxiety are portrayed in horror? And I'll shoot back to you, Alex Cronenberg. Let's start with you this time.
Well, this is something that horror has always dealt with, like back traditionally to early films, Dracula, like traditional horror tropes like Dracula and zombies and werewolves. It's always dealt with the question of reproduction and extending your line or your lineage, and the responsibilities and the kind of pressures that come with that, I think. So even when we're looking at like Hammer horror or Dawn of the Dead, or making more of yourself, and then how do you actually deal with keeping that thing alive and looking after that thing? And I think that's really interesting that it's gone back that far, and we're still talking about. So they are fears, eternal fears about those before you have a child. You're constantly thinking about, well, how do I even get this thing to like the kind of like innate things that we all do. And you can read books and you can watch YouTube or whatever, but nothing prepares you for that. And of course, that fear will always be there. And I think that's reflected throughout filmic history, really.
I love that you mentioned Hammer horror because I'm a big Hammer fan, so that pleases me. And yeah, I think people often don't really dissect Hammer horror in that deeper way. A lot of people just look at it on surface and think, oh, it's Hammer horror, it's lighthearted, but those sort of themes are definitely going on there for sure. So what about you, Kat?
I think horror it's a rich environment to explore anything, but I think motherhood and parenthood, like horror, has so many different subgenres and subsections to it that they just sort of marry perfectly. Like you see, we discussed, pregnancy, there can be, the body horror aspect of that, but also, in something like Inside, when there's a literal threat to the thing that you are carrying inside you, there's that aspect. And then when you get into actually being a parent, there's the psychological aspect, like the Babadook, or something like Z, or Z, which is about a woman whose son develops an imaginary friend, and it turns out that the imaginary friend might not be so imaginary and has a link to her, and it's something that she has sort of passed on to him because this creature is trying to get back to her. There's just so much vastness to both the experience of growing, conceiving, having and raising a child, in the similar fashion that horror is horror comedy, it's psychological, it's body horror, it's there's zombie, there's Hammer horror, there's so much. So why not explore within that playground and have something like Prevenge, which is a concoction of body horror, comedy, tragedy. And the fact that Alice Lowe made that while 7 months pregnant, just directed it and led it, that is my hat goes up to her for that.
Yeah, and one film that I'm surprised has not been mentioned yet is Rosemary's Baby, and I think that really explores both like the body horror that just seems to come anyway with motherhood, but really the psychological aspect of motherhood as well. So how about you agreeing?
I was going to mention Rosemary's Baby. Just as kind of I'm going to speak from my own experience here. When I was pregnant, Ireland was going through a change in the constitution to try and legalize abortion. It's been illegal here up until 2018, I think, when it was overturned, or 2019. Anyway, and before then, you could be put in jail if you got an abortion. We're a very Catholic country still. And Rosemary's Baby is, let's not talk about the dickhead director, but Rosemary's Baby is the perfect depiction of being in a state where even if you want a pregnancy, if anything goes wrong, you've got this almost religious chokehold on you as a mother. In Ireland, the law was that the life of the fetus weighed more than that of the mother. So if you were dying and the only way to save you was an abortion, they'd let you die because they could not legally give you an abortion, even if it would save your life. So watching something like Rosemary's Baby explores really well what it's like to live in a culture where even if you want a baby, there's some sort of outer force on your pregnancy and you're trying to protect it, but you don't quite know what it is. So even that, like, horror explores those kind of things really well. And I guess it's really poignant for actually what is going on in, you know, in the world at the moment. Another film that I think explores a really good kind of theme in motherhood is Hereditary, because I don't know about anyone else, but when I was becoming a mother, I also have a monstrous mother. And I was like, oh my God, if I turn out like her, what am I going to do? And so it's this thought of like intergenerational trauma as well, that is a huge anxiety when you become a parent, because you're like, I really don't want to fuck up my kid. I know I'm gonna, but I'd really prefer not to. And I think that is something that horror explores really well.
Yeah, I think Annie is definitely, that's one of the things that she's most afraid of, that you really see it like more at the start of the film, of the shadow of her mother in her life and her not wanting to, you know, transfer that onto her own children, and all that that what you've just talked about in terms of like the religious chokehold. That's such a fascinating you know, angle to come at it from, and you've related it to experiences, and that's really just fascinating to hear. And what about you, Alex Turner? Do you have any comments on this, or
a little bit? What is it about motherhood that's so ripe for exploration? Well, there's so many ways. Essentially, there's so much that can go wrong. So much that's unknown about what happens next when you have a child, especially before you birth, you see. It comes with lack of control over your own body, not to mention the body that you're carrying. There's so many horror films that focus on pregnancy for a reason, especially for brand new mothers. You don't know what you let yourself in for, and then when time comes for the second child, you discover that one's different again. The lack of control explodes utterly after the birth, especially for those parents who are prone to depression. Then you're going to be tied to this creature and its other parent for years, and who knows where that's going to take you. The lack of control is what I think opens up so many fears that the horror genre can use. But what really makes motherhood ripe for exploration by horror filmmakers is that there are just so many experiences of motherhood. There are as many experiences as there are children with mothers, or indeed have been through history and into the future. Factor in different cultures, different lifestyles, ages, whatever, and writers can feed off countless fears. Of course, there are the ones that haven't been shown on film yet, such as we've said, the queer parenthood. But there's just so many. It's overripe for exploration.
Yeah, as you say, it's as individual as each person and their experience, and I guess their circumstances around that are all unique as well. So yeah, we want more representation, and we just want everyone's unique story to keep coming through, because I think there's just so much more to earth from this subject matter. So mothers in horror then, and we've sort of touched on this, so they can be anything from like warm and gentle characters to domineering and oppressive. And as such, I feel like, and one of the things I think we all kind of agree on here is horror is providing us with an entire spectrum of mothers to digest, to confront, and to consider, which is really refreshing and liberating. So what are your thoughts about motherhood having no like definite fixed sort of definition? And I'm going to throw this out to Megan.
Well, I think we've touched on a lot of it already, and you know what Alex has just said about how there's so many stories, you know, so many stories that, and I think by having a much more multidimensional representation, what that does is raise visibility, and we know visibility is vital, particularly in a time when you're going through such massive changes. If you can see someone who is going through something similar to what you're experiencing, even if that's not a direct conversation, it's sort of slightly removed in a fictional narrative, it can give you that sort of permission to feel that way. And I think that's really important. And there's so many stories, and I think we do have a lot of focus, and filmmakers have a lot of focus on pregnancy because it has got all them different elements. But that idea about control in Hereditary, and I think one that Motherhood's perhaps not necessarily explored as much in it, but for me it is a film absolutely about motherhood, is The Exorcist, and that idea that something could happen externally to you, to your child, that you cannot understand and you can't control. And again, thinking about what does that, how do in real life, we do know that happens, that people, things beyond the control happen, and seeing a representation of that, even if it's one that's really traumatic in terms of, Exorcist is quite a traumatic representation, there's a catharsis to that I think gives that to people when factors out, world is burning, it's chaos. And I think having a sort of cathartic release in form of a horror film that's giving a narrative that you can relate to is a really powerful thing. So the more diverse narratives we have about motherhood, the better, I think.
Yeah, catharsis is definitely, I couldn't agree more. I'm going to throw this one out then to anyone else who might want to contribute. So feel free, anyone, to chip in on this. Does anyone have any other thoughts?
I mean, I would just say that, no two mothers in real life are the same, no two parents are the same. I mean, amongst this panel, those of us that have got children, I imagine if we were to discuss, the decisions that we've made in raising our child, when to wean them, whether to breastfeed or bottle feed, and, any of those decisions, they're all different. So why shouldn't the representations on screen be just as different? It's important that we all have someone that we can identify with. Like I said, I recently rewatched the Babadook and saw the whole film in a different light. That before pregnancy, I just thought Samuel was really irritating, but now, now having, being a mother of a 3-year-old and of experiencing those days where nothing you do is right. I mean, my daughter's first tantrum was because I can't fly. Another one was because I'm not a mermaid. It's just my inadequacies as a mother that I have no possible control over. But she was going full Samuel, and there was nothing that I could do to satisfy her, short of growing a tail and jumping in the river. And it's important that you have those times where you can sort of watch a film and be like, oh yeah, it's not just me, like there is somebody else there. It's nice to have that friend and that representation. And it's also equally nice to see somebody like Lucy in The Lost Boys and go, okay, so it gets better, they get to be teenagers and they get to go off and join this cool vampire gang, and I'll get to be the queen of the vampires. So it's there's a little bit of hope in there too.
Queen of the Vampires, that's what we're aiming for.
Yeah.
Did anyone else want to chime in on anything? No? Okay.
I feel like society's expectations of the role. Yeah, sorry. Society's expectations of the role of the mother is kind of changing and is in flux as well. And the pressures that have changed along with that. And I think films that really show that very, very well are Suspiria. So the two versions of Suspiria. So I feel like in the first Suspiria, the role of Mater Suspirium was someone who was a bit of a leech and fed off the youth and vitality of the young girls that attended the school, and kind of creeped around corridors and was breathing heavily amongst them. And then I think even when Susie confronts her, she baits her and taunts her and tries to belittle her. Whereas I think in Guadagnino's 2018 remake, Mater, when Mater Suspirium takes over Susie's body, she empowers Susie and allows her to cleanse a corrupt system in the Marcus dance school, and allows her to kind of like wreak vengeance, seek truth, and also kind of like give mercy as well, which I think that's a really interesting decision to from God Nino to kind of like make Mother Suspirium as somebody who wants to empower her daughter and give her all the skills in which this is what survive life, which I think is a much more positive representation of motherhood.
Oh, I'm going to have to go back and rewatch both versions now, because that's such an interesting set of observations you've given me there. So then, thinking about how many mother-based horror films take a really honest look at women who are living with the weight of grief, trauma, depression, I would cite like the Babadook and Hereditary as two big ones in that respect. How important do you think it is then that we see mental health, specifically in relation to motherhood, depicted in horror? And if we can go to Igraine.
I think it is one of the most important things in the whole entire world. Like, I've written about this extensively, mainly with the Babadook, because when I saw it, I think I was just getting over the throes of like my extreme postnatal depression. And because I'm the only person in my friend group who had a child, I was like, I'm so fucking alone. And I watched the Babadook and I could see myself in Amelia, suffering from this depression and her grief. And as well as like, I'd also previously suffered a pregnancy loss as well. So I get that grieving while also having to mother. And I felt so seen. And that's something that's really important with mental health, is to feel seen. And just knowing that someone got me and was able to put it in a horror film. And like Kat said earlier, this is how, you know, it's one of your mother groups almost. It feels like you're chatting to someone about like what you've both experienced. And it's honestly, when motherhood is depicted, it can either be really, really bad when it comes to mental health, like with The Hole in the Ground, we see she's suffering from anxiety and she's just popping pills, and it's just like, that's not what mental health is like in motherhood. It just feels a bit 2D, whereas something like the Babadook, it feels a lot more real, a lot more substantial. So I think it's something that not a lot of filmmakers get right when we see mental health in motherhood. You know, it's almost like if she's popping in pills, she's a bad mother. Whereas I think stuff like the Babadook was very careful with its handling, but also very poignant as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about you, Megan?
Well, I agree with everything. But I think it is that, like, you know, like I said earlier about like visibility being really vital, like prenatal depression, postnatal depression, depression when they're 4, when they're 10, when they're 15, you know, all these things that are very common, but they're so shamed socially, culturally. Women are meant to feel, well, parents, you know, are meant to feel this shame if they're not coping. Somehow it's a flaw in you if you're not this bright beaming ray of sunshine that, you know, your entire life is made better by changing nappies. And for women in particular, I think there's this real idea that motherhood alone then, or, you know, just the act of having a child alone should be enough. It should fulfill everything, every facet of you. And that's where you become this, you know, you lose yourself to be a mother. And I think that's not an experience that is common. For people I know who've had children. So when you see these complex representations, like in Hereditary, you know, this conflict about, I love you, you're my children, but actually I despise you, what you've done, these actions, or this fear about intergenerational trauma, you know, none of us want to become as mother. And it's the complexity of that gives this 3D element to it that is so important for people who don't feel like their entire life is made better by, 2 morning feeds and losing the self to being covered in puke for a lot of the time. So
yeah, I'm thinking about the sort of the start portion of We Need to Talk About Kevin, and that famous scene where she's got the pram by the builder and they're enjoying like the sound because it's not the crying. It's like feels really authentic. And Kat, how about you?
Well, I think even the most sort of like mentally robust can have issues during this transition into parenthood, and that's what these films help show. But I think another aspect that I don't think we've discussed yet is the films where there's a mother that's suffering but seen from the child's perspective. So like Pyewacket, there's been a recent bereavement, and you sort of see the mother through Laurie Holden's mother through the eyes of the teenage daughter, and she's got her own hormonal issues and transitions that she's dealing with, and she just thinks that her mum's being so unfair, so she summons a demon to get rid of her. That's the mother as a victim, and it has this great be careful what you wish for element to it. But it just, again, I rewatched that one recently before this panel, and it sort of struck me again, now being a mother, that she was, Laurie Holden's character was just doing the best that she could, but it's obviously explored through the eyes of the daughter, so she's almost vilified a little bit because of that.
Yeah, Pyewacket's such a good example. It's not one that's really spoken of enough, I don't think. And when we're teenagers, we have all these like grand feelings about our parents anyway, don't we? And then we sort of grow up and we go, oh gosh, I was a bit of a horror for my parents, really.
Yeah, it's like she's just, she's dealing with, with the bereavement and grief, and she just wants to change of scene, work in a nice little like craft shop and just, rebuild her life. But it's the end of the world for the daughter because she's an hour away from her friends now, even though her mum's like, I'll still drive you there every day so you can still go to school, and that it's still not enough. And I think that's something that we can all relate to in some capacity. We've all taken a bit of advantage of the people that raised us in some aspect or another, and it isn't until you look back and go, oh, actually they were just doing the best that they could in the circumstances.
And what about you, Alex Turner?
I've got a different approach to this topic than the rest. Well, Babadook, Hereditary, and those other terrific examples of mental health depiction, as it were, are rare, I think. Most horror films with mothers in the past have either had them as messed up, twisted, weak, absent, broken somehow by their families, by their experiences, and usually caricatures. I'm thinking of Who's Watching Oliver more recently. In the past, Frightmare, dreadful parents. Authentic depiction of mental health can be reassuring, cathartic, and all that. And there's a terrific example a couple of years ago, The Swerve, about a mother. But at this stage, I really want to see mothers who are not destroyed by their families. I really want to see someone who is strong and clear thinking without becoming monsters or suicidal or whatever. I want to see mothers who are able to defeat their trauma. Slumber Party Massacre from last year. I want something encouraging when I watch a film. Some maybe it's because I'm older than most of you. I've had enough of people looking at people like me on screen and seeing that they're a mess.
Okay, maybe it's because you've got through the toddler phase. You're a few years on from us. We're all stuck in the trenches still.
The toddler phase returns every 3 years.
And Alex Cronenberg, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I am not the best person to talk to about this because I just don't think it's relatable for me. Like I can't to the female experience. Pregnancy is such a personal experience for mothers that it's hard for me to kind of comment. All I can really kind of say is that having spoken to my wife and about mental health and about how that can decline following pregnancy, I think it's just so integral that there's education around it. I think, and I know she won't mind me talking about this. It's like, professionals and emergency services were like very uneducated, uninformed, and they treated her like a criminal. And that just added to the trauma that she was kind of like going through. And I think that's something that she continues to campaign about now. So I think that if horror can help alleviate some of that and educate some people and kind of shine a light on it, then it's so incredibly useful. So yeah, that would be an observation from some experience.
Do we want like horror films as like on prescription on the NHS? So sadly, we are nearing the end of tonight's discussion, but thanks to everyone for giving us so much to think about. But before you all go, I have got one final question for you. So thinking about some of your favourite mothers in horror then, if you were putting together a mother-based horror double bill, which two films would you choose? And I'm going to start with Kat.
For me, I think it would be, I sort of aim it towards people with preschool and below, because that is my own experience. And I would go with Hellbender and the Babadook. I think the Hellbender really opened my eyes to this lack of identity and almost feeling like you were being replaced. And the Babadook sort of like shows you that you're not on your own. Everybody has these children that are really unruly to control, and it does take its toll. It does take its toll on you. So yeah, they would be my two shout outs.
So we've got one tally for the Babadook. Let's see how, I've got a feeling there might be a few more. But Hellbender is a great recent example. I totally enjoyed that. Alex Cronenberg, what are your picks?
We'll mark up another tally for Hellbender because I think that's probably my favourite film this year, and it's wonderful. I love that kind of like the visions of kind of like witchcraft and occultism mixed in with such like a beautiful relationship between mother and daughter that kind of like starts to become competition between the two, and I just think it's a really complex, interesting, which is really good and made within a family dynamic, which is kind of like unheard of. My second one would be Hereditary. Simply because I just think it's so complex. There are so many emotions going on there, and I think Toni Collette out every single award going because she encapsulates parenthood across the ages of like when that child is born, growing that child to that they kind of like is absolutely wonderful, and also exhibits that feeling sometimes of being kind of like outside looking in. And I think there's lots of scenes within that which kind of demonstrate that, where she's kind of like looking and observing the family dynamic and feeling like outside of that family dynamic.
Definitely.
And I just think it's
yeah. And Alex Turner, what are your two recommendations?
Well, different to everybody else. My double bill would be Ato Blanco, otherwise known as White Coffin, Argentinian film, and A Dark Song, because they present mothers as I want to see them on screen. They are clear thinking and they are driven people. One of them is trying to rescue her kidnapped child. The other one is trying to communicate, or apparently, with her deceased child. But they are determined, whatever it takes, to get this thing done. They're not my favourite mothers, though. My favourites have got rather minor roles in their films. Rose Darko in Donnie Darko. Her tears at the end of that film touched me, you know. And if anyone's seen The Hands of Love, Maggie in that one, hugging her daughter. Excuse me any spoilers, but there you go. Those two moments of motherhood touched me very much. If I can have another little tangent about Hellbender, though, that was the film that gave me the opportunity to do an interview with my child. The two of us interviewed the family, and that was a good.
Wow.
That's what I'm going to remember most about that film. The family on family bonding thing that it gave us. It was fabulous.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
I had a similar interview with them, only mine was unintentional. The 3-year-old turned up about 5 minutes in because the phone didn't have the pictures on that she wanted to look at, and then she proceeded to demand snacks. But they're such a welcoming family that it went nice, but I doubt it was as civilized as Alex's was.
Mine was 14 at the time, and he had planned questions to ask. It was lovely. the beginning of his media GCSE.
Nice.
You give me 2 recommendations there, Alex. So it was Hands of Love, was it?
No. For the double bill, Atto Blanco and A Dark Song.
Oh, I know A Dark Song, so Atto Blanco is definitely going on my watch list. And Agrain, what about you?
My double bill would be Inside, just because it showcases, I mean, obviously an extreme form of the pregnant experience, but it kind of is a depiction of what the pregnant experience is. It's bloody. It's, like Alex Turner said earlier, it's a loss of control, whether it's a homicidal maniac coming after you or just, what's going on with your body is completely out of control. But it really well represents the feeling of being pregnant, where by the end of it, you're just like, oh, fuck it, just let it happen. And then my second one would be The Babadook, because it has so many ways that you can interpret it as motherhood. It's motherhood and grief, it's motherhood and mental health, it's motherhood and neurodivergency, it's motherhood and loss of identity. And it's such an amazing all-rounder of a film that no matter what kind of parent you are, you could probably see yourself in that film.
Yeah, I think I'd need a stiff drink if I was going to do your double bill, Agrain. But I'm not saying no. It's on. And Megan, what about you?
Well, the urge is obviously to say Babadook and Hereditary / The Exorcist, but I've already talked about them, and we've had. So I think I started thinking as we were talking that one aspect that I'd not really thought about till we started this discussion is when we were talking about Paiwaki, his idea as mothers as victims of the children, which I think is a fear, like a primal fear, and it's really unexplored. So I would say Good Night, Mommy would be a good example of that. A horrible one. And then Antibirth with Natasha Lyonne. I don't know if people have seen that. It's the psychedelic. It's on Shudder. It's a psychedelic body horror, and it's like this again, that idea about your body being sort of used against your will and not really knowing what's happening. And it's really good, and it's really a true body horror classic in terms of things exploding and falling off. And so yeah, they would be mine.
Great. Well, this has been such a terrific panel. I've got so much out of listening to all of your contributions. But of course, I am sure our viewers are keen to hear about what you're all up to and where they can find you online. So I'm just going to go around the room one more time and ask people to share any social links and plug any up-and-coming projects. So Megan, let's start with you.
Social media on Instagram, I'm morbid_marvelous_Meg. and on Twitter, I'm Megan R. Kenny. Just writing, carry on writing for Ghouls Mag at the minute. Hopefully a project to plug in the future, though.
Great. And again, what about you?
You can find my podcast, What a Scream, on most podcast platforms. And I'm on Twitter at what_scream. And the thing I want to plug is probably the Hear a Scream Volume 2 that I am contributing to, and that should be coming out soon. And I think it's still going through its fundraising stage. So if anyone would like to contribute to that, please do.
Yeah. Please support Hear a Scream. It's going to be fantastic. And what about you, Alex Turner?
Nothing particular to announce as such. I'm kind of clawing my way out of a post-surgery hiatus still, but hopefully I'll get back into it in due course. On Twitter, I'm AliceClass71, and that's about it.
Great. We look forward to reading more of your work soon. And Alex Kernenberg, where can we find you and what you're up to?
I'm on Twitter at Cronenwords. I've just finished a piece on top 10 traumatic scenes in Stephen King for Moving Pictures Film Club. I'm doing appearing on a podcast, Pieces podcast, discussing crimes of the future. That's coming out this week as well.
Oh, exciting. Crimes of the future. And what about you, Kat?
So on Letterboxd, Instagram, Twitter, I am at Gizmo Shikari. So my work is primarily for the Hollywood News, but I'm currently working on a piece for The Companion on Agent Doggett from The X-Files. I previously did a piece on Home and why it's the most terrifying episode of The X-Files ever, and now I'm back to dissect the replacement Mulder and why he didn't go down quite as well as original Mulder. And then I'm got a few podcast appearances in the bag, including one that's coming out soon. We're going to be talking about Pet Sematary 2, which is, better than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
And then my final thing is August is nearly here, and that's my time to disappear into the world of Fright Fest. So I will be covering as many of those 70 whatever titles that they announce as possible, whilst juggling a toddler and trying not to deprive myself of too much sleep.
Thanks so much, Kat. So thank you to everyone for joining us this evening and for watching this Ghouls Magazine panel on motherhood in horror. Thank you so much to my incredible guests for taking time out of their evening to be here tonight, and for all your amazing contributions that have made this extra special. Thank you to Ariel Basker, who has been supporting us behind the scenes. It's hugely appreciated. I've been your host, Rebecca, and you can find me and my work online at Pencil Pumpkin. But most importantly, please go and check out ghoulsmagazine.com for all the latest editorials, interviews, podcasts, and so much more. Plus, we also now have a special Ghouls Gang podcast for our members. So if you fancy becoming a Ghouls Gang member and you'd like to consider supporting us, take a look at that. And you will get lots of extra special treats from us. So yeah, head on over to ghoulsmagazine.com. Thanks to everyone for all your support of Ghouls. It really means so much to us. We will see you again soon. And don't forget, in the meantime, to keep it ghoulish. We're all off to watch the Babadook and Hellbender. See you soon, everybody. Bye.